The next character I'm going to talk about will be Wario. Now, Wario has history with Nintendo. He's a long-time Nintendo character. He's been around since like the Game Boy, original Game Boy, with the Super Mario Land 2 and the 6 gold coins. He was like the villain in that game. And he's been around since then. So he could have easily been in the original and possibly even the Melee, but he was not included till Brawl. And outside of the fact that he's a long-time Nintendo character, the reason why he really was such an important character to include in Brawl was because the previous generation of GameCube and GameCube and Game Boy Advance, I'm sorry, was because he was all over there basically. Like when the GameCube launched, there was Wario Land. I don't think it was a direct launch, but it was like shortly thereafter. There was a Wario Land game that he was on. Later in the GameCube's lifetime, there was a WarioWare game, and I think there might have been 1 or 2 WarioWare games on the Game Boy Advance as well. So he was all over the GameCube and Game Boy Advance generation. So it was, besides the fact that he's a long-time Nintendo character and has history with them, in which he pretty much could have been included in the older games if they really wanted to include him, they brought him in and included him in this one because of how much of a prominent role he played on the GameCube and Game Boy Advance. Outside of those facts, he was also in the sports games. He was in Mario Sluggers and Mario Strikers. He was in all the Mario Party games, basically, and the Mario Kart, and Mario Kart Double Dash, and Mario Kart on the Game Boy Advance Super Circuit. I'm sure he was in that game as well. He had a big role in the previous generation, more so than he did any generations before then. This was the generation in which Wario played a bigger role than he has ever. You know, this was the generation in which they pushed Wario a lot more than in which they pushed him before. You know, that's the thing. And it was natural to have Wario included as a new character for Brawl. The next character I'm gonna talk about will be Toon Link. Now, Toon Link replaced Young Link. Young Link was in Melee because of not just Ocarina of Time, but mainly because of Majora's Mask. Now, his moveset really didn't reflect it much, but he was mainly there because of Majora's Mask, and his level pretty much proved that because it was the Great Bay and the Falling Moon. That was basically his level in Melee. Now, Toon Link replaced him because Young Link had no say on, like, Game Boy Advance or GameCube. There was, like, no Young Link in there. And Toon Link is not Young Link. Young Link is, like, the younger Link of, like, the more, in quotations, realistic style Link. Toon Link is just Toon Link. And this was the generation in which Toon Link was created. And he has Zelda Wind Waker, The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker on the GameCube from 2003, the Four Swords Adventure games from the Game Boy Advance in the GameCube, as well as the Minish Cap, which I think was 2004 on the Game Boy Advance. Just like Wario, Toon Link was all over the GameCube and Game Boy Advance generation. He was there constantly, so it was a natural reason, a natural progression to instead get rid of Young Link, who had no part in that generation, and replace him with Toon Link. And it represented the other side of the Legend of Zelda series, in which Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf represented, like, Twilight Princess, while he represented all the Toon-related games at the time. Mostly, in terms of moveset-wise, it was the Wind Waker, but he was there because of the other games as well. And that's the reasons pretty much why Toon Link was in there, besides the fact that they wanted to add maybe another version of Young Link, because a younger version of Link is typically the style of Link we normally see in the games. Link is normally like a younger age. He's not always like an adult or a teenager or something. He's usually been a younger age, so it's kind of been a way of representing that younger Link, but doing it in a more updated style with the Toon form, which had a prominent role in the previous generation, in which they were pulling characters from. Now, when it comes to Pit, the main reason why Pit was included was because he was a retro inclusion to the game. He had no previous game since the Game Boy original or the NES, and he was there mainly because he was one of the new retro characters. And he represents like an old school NES game and an old school Game Boy original game. So he was pretty much one of the most important characters when it came to the Game Boy original and the NES. He was an important old school Nintendo character that Sakurai wanted to pull from like the ashes and move on to actually like bring it back as a new retro character. Like Ice Climbers and Game & Watch were added in Melee. He was one of the retro characters added into, you know, Brawl, because Sakurai wanted to pull him from the ashes and revisit the character, and he was an important character at the time and people forgot about him, so he wanted to reignite people's interest in the character. And that's really the simple reason why, because he's a retro character, and that's the reason why Pit was really why he was in Brawl. The next character I'm going to basically be talking about is going to be the other retro character that was added into Super Smash Bros. Brawl, Rob, the robot. He was another retro inclusion, so that was the main, first and foremost reason for why he was included. But out of the two retro characters included in this game, he was the retro character that had more history, technically, and more, you know, reasoning to why he was included. Now, when I talked about the retro inclusions in, you know, Melee, Marth, Ice Climbers, and Mr. Game & Watch, I did state that retro characters are not, usually they're just to represent old school, you know, Nintendo. They too sometimes typically have a reason for why they're included. Typically have like a history or a reason, or a, you know, a reason for why they were included. When it came to, let's just talk about like Ice Climbers and Marth were the retro characters that just were there because they were popular old school characters, or Sakurai liked them and he wanted to pull them back from history and put them into a new light. Marth being the Japanese retro, Mr. Game & Watch being Mr. Game & Watch being like Mr. Game & Watch, and Ice Climbers being the old school retros. But when it comes to Mr. Game & Watch, like I stated, he represented the old line of the original Game & Watch handhelds, the original Nintendo handheld before the Game Boy. He had a reason besides just being an old school character for why he was there. He actually represented something, as in the old handheld Nintendo consoles. He had a reason. Marth and Ice Climbers were just from old school games that were popular, and Sakurai wanted to bring them back. The same thing happens here with Rob. When Pit was included, he was just included as an old school retro character that Sakurai wanted to bring back and have people talk about him. He wanted to bring him back and just have him be in with the new generation, so the younger generation can play as him, and the old generation can look at Pit and like be glad he's back. But when it comes to Rob, that is a reason too, and that's a reason for all retro characters in general. But Rob is in that Mr. Game & Watch mindset. He is a retro character that has another reason besides just being retro for why he was included in the game. He was an accessory that was released in the 80s. He was an accessory that was popular like worldwide, I would assume. But his biggest impact technically was in America, because he was the accessory sold with the NES when Nintendo decided to start making consoles and started deciding to sell it elsewhere. America, after the crash of like the early 80s, like because of Atari and everything, Nintendo did not know if they could make it in the market or not, and even America didn't know if a video game market could technically make it in the market or not. Nintendo brought their console out and they sold it with Rob, and Rob was an accessory that helped sell the NES in America as like the children's toy, as like the new big thing kind of a thing. So he has history, just besides being a retro accessory and popular worldwide, he has history with America because it basically helped the NES sell in America. Outside the fact that he's retro, he has reasoning behind them, like Mr. Game & Watch did. He was included in a few recent games at the time. The small reason why I include the DS, he was in Mario Kart DS, and he, as far as I heard, I think he showed up in the Gamer here and there, like as like maybe a background or prop or something. He was there somewhere, like on the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance. So they were slowly but surely bringing them back, and then they did it with, you know, with Super Smash Bros. Brawl. And besides, like I said, that's the main reasons why he's included. Retro characters, like I said, are there just to represent old school Nintendo, but they can sometimes be there to represent specific reasons. Game & Watch had the specific reason in Melee because of the Game & Watch handheld line that was released before the Game Boy, the original Game Boys. And Rob was the one here because he was a super popular accessory, and an accessory that did technically help sell the system here in America. There you go. And that's the main reason why Rob, that was the important reason why Rob was included, outside of just being a retro Nintendo-oriented object thing character, you know, and there you go. And he did barely, but really small, but surely he was slightly being brought back anyways. Meta Knight will be the next character I talk about, and first and foremost, Meta Knight is from the Kirby series. Kirby is made by Sakurai, so of course, like, Sakurai include maybe, let's say, a character because it was from his own series. But Meta Knight has specific reasons for why he was there included to begin with. There were quite a bit of, at the time, you know, not so much on GameCube, but there were Game Boy Advance Kirby games, and there were, at the early point of the DS, there was Kirby games as well. There was Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube, Kirby Air Ride, and then there was the Kirby and the Amazing Mirror on the Game Boy Advance, and then the DS ones, you know, other games too I'm not actually mentioning off here. And Meta Knight, he has history with, you know, Kirby as well. I think he started back in, I think, Superstars. So besides him being recent, he has history with the series. So being recent and having history, and being not technically a villain, but being like the anti-hero of the series, it was kind of natural that he might have been one of the new characters added in to the series for Super Smash Bros. Brawl when they wanted to start adding Kirby characters, because at this point, Kirby was by himself for 2 games. He was included in the original, and then he stayed by himself. And Melee and Brawl was when they finally started adding Kirby characters. Meta Knight being one of the 2, and he was included because he was relevant enough to be recent on the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance and the early DS through Air Ride, Amazing Mirror, and all that stuff. And there you go. And he's a popular character. And there you go. And the other Kirby character included was King Dedede, which has been in the Kirby series since day one, so he has a long time history with the series as well. He's one of its many villains, which now kind of is like another anti-hero, because in quite a bit of games he's actually a good guy, and he helps out Kirby quite a bit, like the 64 game and whatnot, Crystal Shards. And he was recent games as well. He was like on the GameCube and Game Boy Advance and early DS, like Kirby Air Ride, Kirby Nightmare and Dreamland on the Game Boy Advance. I think he was in early DS games. And just like Meta Knight, he has a long-standing history with the series. So since he has a long-standing history with the series and was still around to be recent enough, he was included in the game, just like Meta Knight. They are recent enough, they have long-standing history, and they're Sakurai's games, so he can kind of pull the cords there, pull his weight there to get his own characters in there. But that was just like I said with Kirby in the original, like how Sakurai wanted to put his character in there because he wanted to get him in there himself. That's a reason, but it's a minor reason, because the history behind Kirby and the Kirby games trumps that easily, and is the main reason why Kirby gets characters. Why Kirby has a history, like with Nintendo, and he was on the Super Nintendo, and he was on the Game Boy original in order to be included into the original Smash Brothers. And then Meta Knight and King Dedede have history with the series, were recent enough because of the GameCube and Game Boy Advance early DS games that they were natural choices. Anti-hero and a character that used to be a villain and is kind of an anti-hero now.